Okay, good evening everybody and welcome to everybody who's watching this on YouTube. I'm sure it is hundreds of people, so it should be. So welcome to tonight's overview and scrutiny services meeting. Councillor Kevin Dennis, I'm the chair. We're due to finish at 9 unless there's a really good reason. We'll be finished on time, especially as it's not particularly good. Before we start, can I just welcome Sam, your first meeting here with us, or with myself as chair, so you're very welcome. We'll try and be gentle. And to Richard Seaborn, as this your first formal meeting as a proper fully fledged member of this committee, so you're very welcome, Richard. Okay, so we go to agenda item 1. That's to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th September, which are on the council's website. Has anybody got any comments, amendments, changes or anything else? If not, I will sign off and agree it as correct. I think silence is gone, this is brilliant. Kim, have we got any apologies for absence, substitutions?
We've got apologies for absence from Councillor Philip Townsend and Councillor Carol Coburn. And there isn't a discrepancy on the agenda in that Councillor Hegan was actually down as a substitute, but she is actually a full committee member. So I do apologise for that.
I want to say you're very welcome. You've been here many times, so
well, I would like to be welcome.
you are very welcome, and we look forward to your input. Okay, brilliant. Do we have any declarations of interest?
None received, Chairman.
Okay. Any questions from members of the public?
None received, Chairman.
Good. And questions from members?
None received.
Okay. I think we think Betty Ames is on the line, so on the telephone. So welcome, Betty. You're very welcome to this meeting. Okay, so if I can move to agenda item 6, which is the Safer Waverley Partnership. I'm not sure who's starting, whether it's Katie or Eve or Sam.
It's Annie.
Anybody?
It's me.
Well, we have a team of 4 then who can talk to us. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councillor Deans. I'd like to introduce the Safer Waverley Partnership plan for this year. Some of you around the table will be familiar with these plans. They're very much a shared responsibility for developing and introducing strategies to reduce crime and disorder in the area, which is as I say, a statutory function. I'd also like to introduce on the screen, we have Inspector Sam Adcock, the Borough Commander, who's familiar to many of you. We also have Louise Gibbons from Surrey County Council, Kath from South West Surrey Domestic Abuse, Councillor Penny Marriott, the portfolio holder for community safety, and Matt Richardson from Surrey Fire and Rescue, who will answer any of the difficult questions that I can't answer. The partnership plan is a statutory document that we produce, and it's in front of you today for your comments. The actual function and statutory responsibility belongs to the partnership as a whole rather than to the borough itself, and it is developed as a partnership. I know the chair of this committee is very familiar with these documents.
I chaired it for many a year, so we'll have a couple of questions when we start. But, anything else or anything from any of you? Looks like the Magnificent 7, as you've got so many people here, which is really always nice. Okay, I'll open it up, so rather than me jumping in first.
Thank you, Chair. I found this quite a difficult report to read. It's a good report, but it's understanding what the aims of this Safer Waverley Partnership is focused on. To my mind, it's a very naive sort of interpretation of it, is that we are simply a conduit to start with, which the first two bits of legislation you note essentially define what Waverley have to do in the organisation of enabling a Safer Waverley system, let's say. Then the next 3 legislative items are specific areas of concern. Now, when I looked through this, I was trying to find the sort of link between the legislation and what you have in your task list. For example, now I can pick out one particular one, which is on page 16, where you define that particular task as ensure the powers introduced by the Antisocial Behaviour Crime Policing Act 2014 No, that's the only place I found in this list of tasks where you actually link the activity back to one of the specific legislative items. So that was just an issue there, because I thought, well, okay, where do I know? Where do I find the other items you've got here? How does it link to that specific legislation that covers it? I just, having a sort of a simplified, this is what we're doing, and it's covered by that legislation. That sort of comment.
I don't know if there's anything else on the screen next to take, but if I start, and apologies, and my back to you all. The legislation is a piece of enabling legislation which gives the group of partners a statutory duty to reduce crime and disorder in the area. It's not terribly specific, it has got some specifics in it, but it's for the partnership to look broadly at the community that we serve and link the activities and the issues in that community in a partnership to make sure that, that things don't fall through the cracks. The background to the legislation was some really bad ASB problems, I believe in the 1980s, where it might be familiar to you, where the same person was dealt with by social services, it was dealt with by the police, the fire service, and there was a lack of linking up. So the legislation was about joining everybody together. So the activities that the partnership identify are the things that are an issue to the community and that we see through the evidence base, which is the crime and disorder figures and social behaviour figures, domestic abuse figures. So it's those sort of broader enablings rather than an absolute direct link from the legislation that says you must do that. I don't know if anybody else would like to. Very quiet. Quiet as I've ever known them.
I know, I'm stunned.
Sorry, Eve, do you want to come in around the legislation and how it all fits in?
Yeah, I mean, just following on from what Annie said. So the main enabling act was the Crime and Disorder Act of 1998. But following on from that, the Police and Justice Act 2006 is what actually gave the this committee the power to scrutinise the work of the partnership. That's where that came from. And then we moved on to the Domestic Violence and Crime and Victims Act 2004 as well. That actually set up and put in place the requirement of the partnership to carry out domestic homicide reviews. So that was that. And then the other piece of legislation is the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act, and that has sort of that's given the council and the police and partners a number of tools and powers to more effectively tackle antisocial behaviour.
I think that's what I sort of understood in a way. I'm sort of putting my audit hat on. And so the question was, I said earlier, was sort of linked into the question I might ask: how do I know that you are actually doing what you are supposed to do from the legislation point of view? Because I don't see that actually reflected in these task items. I don't see the link to the legislation, except that one item.
It's general permissive, well, it's not permissive power because it's requiring us to form a partnership and look at the evidence base. And I can see what you're saying though, that there's not a direct, you must do this, this and this. The direction is to form a partnership to review, with the exceptions and the stuff around domestic abuse and domestic homicide reviews.
If I go to E first and then.
I was just going to say, to finish that point, is it not then worth making that statement in the policy that there isn't that link because the legislation is generally permissive and the fact of the partnership is in the main what satisfies the legislative requirements? Just to square the circle.
Yeah, reflect on the comments and pass those back to the broader partnership.
Okay, Eve.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to clarify so the legislation around the carrying out of domestic homicide reviews. We obviously the numbers are in the report, so we've got those listed in there as well, and also the community triggers. That is another requirement under the Antisocial Behaviour Act legislation, and the executive of the Safer Waverley Partnership do monitor levels of both of those. So that's just one aspect where we do monitor, but as just been pointed out, sort of a lot of it is sort of intrinsic within the work of the partnership.
Okay, thanks. A couple of other minor points. Just things like, are there any issues where you're dealing with the other organisations or members of the public? Is there something which should be on the risk register or not? I mean, how do you deal with risk issues?
When you mean risk issues, how do you define risk? Because it's all risk, really.
You're making decisions on how to, say, act on a particular incident or in a particular case involving the partners.
Yes.
Is there any risk, in fact, in your role in doing that?
Yeah, I would say there is. In as much as any partnership working, your organisation and your safeguarding and your coordination of actions is actually really has to be tight, so there's no gaps by which any one organisation falls through. I think the partnership works well with that and actually holds the individual accounts of each organisation to account, if that makes sense. So I think, yeah, and in terms of the wider safeguarding risks that might come across and wider risk assessments that need to be done, we work collectively to establish that, yeah.
Okay, so is there, coming back to the risk register, is there anything there that you should specifically have to cover your own actions, officer actions?
When we feel, and Annie, correct me if I'm wrong, when we feel that the risk to the organisation, from our perspective, the council has escalated, that is when it would go to the risk register. If it's that would be that side.
That's after the event. I'm looking for.
No, it would be prior to the event.
Yeah.
So if something is, for example, we can see that this could go wrong, or that there might be an issue, or that there might be some outcome to that, we would definitely raise that on a risk register for the council. But if, for example, there are some actions that are being undertaken by the police, we wouldn't put that on a council risk register, but that would be on the partnership awareness. So our risk register from the council is about how it would impact on council risk, if that kind of makes sense, Councillor.
I think so. The council risk register is the important thing.
Yes.
So at the moment, there's nothing on there which covers your activity.
Not at this moment, because there's nothing that outside of what we are expected to do has a raised risk profile at this moment, but that could change tomorrow if a case appears.
Okay, and then just one very final comment, just a comment in passing.
Yeah.
I attended the Hale Community Centre board meeting this afternoon, and they reported on their sort of issues with the Safer Waverley Partnership,
Right.
not particularly working well. Now, I don't know what the issues are. We didn't go into discuss the particular cases involved, but just to say that they do have problems with it not working as well as it should do.
That's sad to hear, and I'd be very happy to take that forward and understand what those issues are. I don't think we were aware of that.
No, I don't know.
But very much would like
I
to.
don't know what it
Yeah.
entails, so. Katie,
Yeah.
No, I think Katie's.
Sorry, Katie knows.
Yeah, I mean, the partnership is a collective, and each organisation are responsible for their own areas of work. So when we tend to come together, it's because we're looking at a multi-agency problem solving, and that can be around an individual or it can be around an area. Now, the Safer Waverley Partnership, if we take the Hale, for example, we've had a task and finish group. We've had a few task and finish groups at Sandy Hill for over the years that I've been working at Waverley, but we have actually reconvened a Sandy Hill task and finish group that actually is on tomorrow, and Eve will be part of, to re-look at the issues that, if they are still happening in the area. Unfortunately, until we reset it up, only 3 weeks ago were we aware that there were still any issues, because they weren't being actually directly reported back to us, which is a little bit sad. And I think that's the communication is a little bit two-way, so we do need to pick that up. But that's all on the agenda. But when it comes to risk management, with our community, with our Safer Waverley Partnership, JAGS, which is our joint action group, which is community. We have a neighbourhood dispute action group, which Sam Adcock chairs. And also we have the community harm and risk management, which is looking at very vulnerable individuals. The partnership doesn't take responsibility of safeguarding that individual or risk managing that individual. It's also up to it will bring together everybody's risk registers and plans, and start looking at what can we do more than what we're doing if it's not working, if that makes sense. But it's up to each organisation to have their own risk registers, risk plans, safeguarding plans in place to manage those individuals. I don't know, Sam, if you want to add to that, or if that makes a little bit more sense around it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we've worked a lot over the last 18 months, 2 years around building relationships within the partnership and having that open and honest conversations between us, especially around risk. And the Neighbour Dispute Action Group has been testament to that, about how the partnership can really work and come together. And I'd be interested to know what the issues are with Hale as well, because we have done quite a lot of work and built some good relationships with the councillors. So Sam, if you could let me know as well, I'd very much appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. I only raised that to see how we learn from the feedback, how it's actually the Safer Waverley Partnership is working or not working in these circumstances.
Can we just add, if there's a domestic homicide, when there's a review of the homicide in Waverley, they'll look at what actions have come out and what lessons can be learned, and it goes on a register, and then you try and address all of those, because some might be very police, because it might be about intelligence. Some might be council, because it could be about council houses and people living in there, and what have we done, you know. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned, and they keep a register of what's been done, what training. There is quite a bit about trying to manage risk and not repeating the same mistakes in the future.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Okay.
I have 3 points, if I can
You
take
certainly
them
can.
separately. The first is to do with measurement. And there's a lot of words around success, but not many numbers. And I understand that, for example, there are statistics available on the extent to which antisocial behaviour in Godalming has reduced since we introduced the youth service. And I think if there are good things that can be measured numerically, they should appear in a report such as this. And the other side of measurement is that, quite a lot of the lead responsibilities are Waverley responsibilities. I think there should be some KPIs around that appear in our performance reports, and there are no community KPIs at all. So things like community triggers, in which we're hoping to see that being used more, even if it's just a data-only entry. I think we should have some visibility on the numbers. So measurement was my first point. The second is, I think there is a typo regarding the DHR reports, because on the website we only get as far as DHR 6, but at point 2.9 we're talking about DHR 8. So I don't know if that exists or it is just a typo that might want tidying up. And then the final thing is, I am very interested to see the reference to community speed watchers, but as a ward councillor who have lots of speeding issues, I don't actually know how to go about setting one up. I don't know where they are. So is there more that could be done to spread the word and maybe have extra ones? Because I just genuinely don't know how that side of things works. But I think it is an issue that concerns a lot of our residents, and we could perhaps do more about.
Okay. So can I just put your 2 points, and then I'll go to Councillor Forrest-Jessica. So the community triggers, maybe Louise will just give that some thought, whether they can be some KPIs as being suggested, but let's try and get KPIs where we have the information easily obtainable. We don't want to set them, so there's loads of work to do that. So let's base them on the information we have, so we can just plug them out of the system. So maybe Louise or somebody can just look at that and come back at the next meeting. Speedwatch, normally parish councils are the first port of call. They're the ones who locally monitor them. They can be supported in other ways, but it is the parish councils, because it's normally the parish volunteers who run them. And then obviously then their information then goes to the police and goes on the database. So the police will assist them. And so start off with the parish and they'll know what to do. Anything else?
Just the first part of what I said in terms of where data exists, as I understand, for example, on improvements on ASB, and I think should form part of this report.
Yeah, Sam will be able
So
We've got 3 hands.
we've got a Mexican wave up there. So let's just go for fun. Who was first on to this? Sam, I think you were first.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In relation to measurement, I'm always a little bit hesitant when it comes to just measuring success on numbers, especially around our ASB, because at the moment our ASB figures are not entirely accurate because all coronavirus cases were recorded as antisocial behaviour over the last couple of years. So it's difficult for us to assess where we are now in a real fashion with figures. But I completely accept what you're saying, that there is figures that can and will be shared, and I'm happy to share whatever you need to in relation to that. In relation to the community speed watch, that is something that over COVID we're aware that our relationships did break down with some of our volunteers. I have allocated a dedicated sergeant to that who has been making those relationships. If you want to start one up, please do feel free to get in contact with me. We're always very happy to help support through that process, and I can put you in charge of my sergeant. But they are something that are really key to us, really important to us, and we are working hard with the volunteers to try and improve those relationships and to increase the amount of speed watches that we've got in the area.
Okay, thank you for that. Katie, your hand's up next.
Yeah, just around 2 points. The domestic homicide reviews. Yes, we have potentially had 8. Like it's not a typo. What we do when we have a domestic homicide come in, we have a panel that's set up of all the multi-agency partners that we discuss to how we will manage that and whether it reaches the threshold to actually go through to a full review. So DHR 7 was decided not to go through to a full review, so hence we're not carrying out a review at the moment, but we do still keep the numbers as in order of how many we have. So sorry, that isn't an actual typo. We've had sort of 4 potential domestic homicide, 8 potential domestic homicide reviews, but one of them we're not carrying out a full case review. It's actually potentially, it'll actually potentially be a safeguarding adult review. So we work with the partners to see where it fits in.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you. And from my experience, they
take
an age. I mean, I think when I had the role 3 or 4 years ago, we were up to number 5, I think, if my memory serves me right.
Yeah.
So, and they just drag on for years after years because of the learning and the reviews and everything else. I'm working with the Home Office. So they do take a lot of time and a lot of effort. Thank you, Katie.
Sorry, just the second point around KPIs and adding them into our own KPIs within the council. My only concern are these are sort of Safer Waverley partnership. Would we have to have it as a sort of separate area, because we can't necessarily, as for community triggers, our role is, because we're part of that Safer Waverley partnership, that we process them as our administrative role as the within the partnership. Eve might have more to say, but I just don't know how then they would fit into like a council KPI. Just would have to give that some thought.
And absolutely, because if we have any KPIs, they've got to be meaningful for a starter, and something actually that can be influenced. Yeah, so we not have KPIs for the sake of them. I think there's a little bit of work to be done to see what can add value, because we have a statutory responsibility to monitor the work, and that will make it easier. it will make it better if we can say, well, we had a KPI to do X and we've achieved that, or we've increased the numbers, or we've decreased the number of reports. You know, but we've got to do something that we've got control on, because it's pointless to setting you targets that you've got no chance of succeeding.
I think I did say perhaps data only, because there's quite a lot of information in the reports that's data only, and it's quite useful to councillors who don't really have visibility on what all of the activities of the council are, to have some idea of the numbers.
And data only targets. With your concerns about sometimes, you know, data doesn't tell you the true picture, but actually some commentary can go in there, because like domestic homicide reviews, they could be 5 years from start to finish. So people probably wouldn't realise that unless there's some backup commentary to that. So I'm not expecting a great big suite of KPIs, but I think a few for the priorities, or one for the priorities, to show progress or not would be good. I'll make the point again, I do not want to be creating a load of work to just pluck out data that has no value. So let's be sensible. You can come up with some suggestions, we can bring it back to another meeting, and we can talk about, is this going to help us? Because if it doesn't help us, then we won't have it. Or my suggestion is we don't have it. So maybe I'll say some draft ones, what you think, and we'll have it in the next meeting.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Thanks.
Eve, have you got anything else to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to just add on what Inspector Adcock said around the community speed watch. I appreciate that the partnership plan comes out quite small in your agenda pack, but under priority 5, sorry, not 5, there's only 4 priorities. Under priority 3, focus on the crimes that most affect Waverley. There is actually a priority in there around helping make Waverley's roads safer, and community speed watch is under 3.2 there. So we've actually, everything that Inspector Adcock outlined, we've actually got in the partnership plan. So in terms of, I mean, that's definitely something that we can follow up in your particular area, councillor, after this meeting, because it's very much around the partnership. Would like to keep sort of a watching eye, whilst it is a sort of a primary function of the police. It is something that has been picked up in sort of other committee meetings previously, and some consultation that Inspector Adcock did with councillors earlier in the year. So that's why we've included it in the plan. Thank you.
Okay, I've just got a couple of comments. Sorry, Councillor Wojciechowski, of course you had your hand up. My apologies, you've been patient.
Oh, no, you're very welcome. Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everyone. And may I just say that I think this is a really good document for a number of reasons, because I think we have to lead by example, and we have to demonstrate that we are doing some joined up thinking. And it's interesting that I think some of the things that we want to measure you can't, you simply can't, because of the nature of the beast. But I'm really proud to be able to support something like this, because as I say, we need to be leading by example and having that joined up thinking, making sure everybody's communicating well. There's some heavy stuff in here as well. It's really heavy and it's really emotional. It's really difficult. And I think when you start to read through it, you realise just what percentage of the population are actually in real crisis, mentally, physically, however you want to describe it. But there is real issues out there. And if you're looking at this report and listening and watching this meeting, you'll probably think, well, how does it affect me as a resident? And I think it's hard then to measure in real terms what this document actually means to the resident who's looking at it. But I'll go back to the point about, I mean, I watched the presentation over the domestic abuse, and it was quite harrowing to listen to, and the numbers are scary. And we all know in a place like Waverley, or a place that's, you know, relatively wealthy, it's very difficult to have issues like that. And as I say, this is why it's very difficult to actually measure some of this stuff. We have a problem at the moment with the Chamber of Commerce raised it this week, where we've got a lot of attacks on the shop windows and crowded by areas. And this is a document that I think it could really address and look at that, and then come up with the data to actually say, how is it being managed? How is it being looked at? How are we supporting the Chamber of Commerce? So I'm really pleased to see this document. I'm really pleased to see the joined up thinking. I hate to go on about something that's passionate to me, but I think when we look at some of the problems that we've got, and we look at the intensity, and I know that we've got links to loads of partners here, But I think it'd be interesting as well to link it to the suicide prevention strategy, because a number of these cases that we look at, the actual suicide rate in terms of age is harrowingly increasing to something like 35 now and under. It's getting really, really good, and it's just something that's not talked about. And I'm sorry that I keep bringing it up, but I do think it's vital, because I do see that there's a link here. So I just end by saying it's a great document, joined up thinking, but put meat on the bones and make it something that our residents can read. And we have housing stock, and when our people go in there, let them be able to have the tools they need to be able to feedback. So some of those people who are looking at here who might say to somebody, help me, that there is a natural progression through this document. You can use the joined up organisations here to actually make it meaningful and have some validness to it. So that's all I have to say, but well done. I think it's a great document. Don't understand most of it because of the legislation, but I still think it's very good on this list.
Yeah,
Very
that's it,
useful.
yeah.
I'll go to Councillor Seaborn first and then to Katie, and then I'll put more questions in.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I've got three points really raising, addressing the data issue, going one step further, if you like. There's quite a lot in here about having data. Questions really are, how are we using it? So the first point is in item 4.7 on page 8 of our papers, it discusses the welcome formation of Neighbourhood Dispute Action Group. Can I ask if this group's focused on any particular group of residents, i.e. council tenants, or does it cover everybody? And are there any patterns emerging from the cases that have been handled so far? Because it's great collecting data, but data needs to lead to something. And so I guess I'm looking for the so what from the data. On the same theme, it's already stated the domestic abuse figures are absolutely horrendous. So again, the question is, are they being analysed to identify recurring themes and hotspots that we could be aware of for focus of action? Because it's not altogether clear from priority 2 of the action plan that there is that detailed focus. It may be implicit, but I couldn't find it as an explicit thing to do. And then the third point, which is really close to my heart and hopefully to my fellow Bramley, Busbridge and Hascombe councillor next to me, it's the rural crime aspects. The plan talks about correct categorisation and reporting. That's the only item in there. And we don't need to just correctly categorise and report. The wording in the overall report sort of rather plays down the severity, and across the whole borough that may well be right in terms of the total number of crimes, but that ain't the case in Bramley. Over the last 3 to 6 months, we've had slingshot attacks on animals, we've had illegal grazing of horses all over the place. One farm reported 3 thefts of diesel and 2 thefts of equipment in a very short period, only a couple of weeks ago. There's quite a lot of stuff that is bona fide rural crime, and quite a lot of other crime that's happening in Bramley that people are suspecting might be related to some of the perpetrators. Now, I've had a really good conversation with Inspector Adcock about this. I raised it with her, and she very kindly rang up and we had a long discussion about it. But I think the point I'm making is the same as the first 2 points I'm making. It's fine recording stuff. It's the so what we're going to do with it when we've got that captured. And the rural crime may not be a huge problem across the whole of Waverley, but at the moment I'm getting approached almost every week by something that is either directly rural crime or is suspected to be caused by people who are perpetrating rural crimes in Bramley. So in my little corner of the world, it's quite a big issue. So can I leave that with you as a thought? It's quite important to me.
It's a bit like having a target saying to have a strategy by this day. Well, that's great, but the strategy could be rubbish. So what really the target is actually to have a strategy and implement and improve stuff. So I think that's really, because you can check data, but if you don't do anything with it, it's pointless. So I think we can do a bit of amending there. because we now we've got them started. We've got Katie and Sam want to come back in. I'll do it your.
Sorry,
Yeah, go on then.
just very, very quickly, in relation to the NDAG, so the neighbour dispute, so that was set up as a result of our hate crime figures being around 28% of all hate crimes linking to neighbour disputes, which meant that you were more likely to be a victim of a hate crime in your own home, which is a pretty horrendous figure. So that's why we started the Neighbour Dispute Action Group. Now, we're nearly 12 months into that, and we've decreased that by 10%, which doesn't sound a lot, but it is a lot. And the key thing for the neighbour dispute group is about problem solving the dispute itself, to try and put that long-term solution in place. So trying to resolve the problem, which ultimately, if you resolve the problem, you're not going to have all of the stuff that falls out of it that then goes into charm and to JAG and that kind of thing. So and also a key part of it is supporting our staff in the complex nature of those disputes, and also the learning that comes out of it. So there's a specific thing that we might do with this case that we can take away for that future case. And the NDAG is very much about learning and making sure that mistakes that we've made or things that we've tried that have worked, we try again. So it's an ever evolving process. But I think that with the NDAG, we are looking at both figures, but also about how we move forward in that learning. And just very quick around the rural crime, I appreciate that there isn't a great deal of that in the partnership plan. However, the vast majority of what you discussed is a police related thing, and we've obviously talked about that a lot. And just because it's not in this plan, it doesn't mean to say that we're, as on the police side of things, aren't feel that it's incredibly important and doing everything we can around it. And what I just would remind everybody is that we do still have a dedicated rural crime PCSO who does look at all of those spikes and trends, and that's something that the force has really fought to keep. So it is important to us. I'll continue to have more chats with you if you want, Councillor, no problem at all. And we will look at those spikes and trends and see what we can do to assist.
Thank you, Katie, and then I'm going to say something.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just really going back to Councillor Forachesky's comments around mental health and the suicide prevention plan. And what you're saying is absolutely correct. It does heavily feature, and actually some of the key learning from our most recent domestic homicide review, which one we're currently undertaking, that will come out as one of our key learning points, and we're around doing certainly, and it won't be just Waverley, it's going to be across the whole of Surrey, some training around the suicide prevention for people who are suffering from domestic abuse, who are victims of domestic abuse. In relation to sort of some of the work we do, it is also driven by wider data. So around the sort of work we're doing with domestic abuse, it's driven around the sort of data that we know. So we'll do more publicity and promotion and raising awareness around the World Cup, because we know through statistics, through hospital admissions, through reporting, that domestic abuse can increase around unfortunately, things such as the World Cup. I mean, Kath can talk more about that to you, but yeah, a lot of the work that we do is driven by kind of data that is going, is also sort of national and local. So, the work is driven with bearing in mind what is at the forefront of what people are experiencing. So, Kath, I don't know if you just want to mention a little bit about the domestic abuse side.
Thanks, Katie. I was just going to say that as a service, we carry out further analysis on our data. So we're constantly looking at that and looking at our referral rates and type of abuse that individuals are experiencing. So we have got more data than just the numbers, if you like. We also look at outcomes as well. As Katie just said, we're working with the Safer Partnership around awareness with the World Cup coming up to Christmas, and just really making sure that people know we're out there to support individuals and how to reach out and get help.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I've just a couple of points. I suppose the first one, following on from Councillor Forachesky about the suicide prevention strategy. Mark, I wonder, when we discussed it in our ONS, we put a number of recommendations in. I think it'd be really good if we could come back to this meeting with where are we with those recommendations. Because what we don't want is to put in really good recommendations and then they just get lost in the, and we don't actually do anything that we said we were going to do. So I'm not sure who was the lead within,
So, John, may I just?
of course you can.
So as you may or may not be aware, the Surrey County Council have reviewed their suicide prevention strategy and have a new draft of it, which they've been discussing with us in the group. Katie has been there and with others. So they've done some consultation, and so it's something that we can bring back, and we have our own action plan, which in the light of the review of the strategy, we'll be sort of having a look at again. So we can bring that back to the next meeting or the one after, whatever you would like in your forward programme.
Good, but can we look at what our strategy and what our recommendations from this committee were?
Yes.
Because there were obviously issues for Waverley. I just want to make sure that we're not forgetting that actually there's some things we should be doing as an organisation. So I think there's two bits of work, whether they come in at the same time, because obviously Surrey doing their bit. But, you know, I think we need to just remember, what did we recommend from this committee?
Yes, and that's in our own.
So I think we probably need to go and make sure we're doing what we said we were doing.
I totally get your point, Jeff. Yeah, we can bring that back.
Maybe, hopefully for the next meeting,
We can do that in January.
I think that'd be really, really useful.
Yeah.
And my only other comment is, and I know looking at the dates of some of these things that have been commenced, which are quite late in this action plan, there's a lot of reds. And we seem to be taking a long time starting some of these things. I would just like someone just to go through that, because a really simple one, which we've talked about, the rural cry, I mean, that commenced in April 22 as the start date, yet still showing up. So there may be a lot of commentary behind, and I don't think we need to go through it now. Can we just look at the reds, and maybe at next meeting just have a quick summary on why are they red? And there could be some really good explanations. Some of them say because of start dates, etc., etc. I accept that. It'd be just really good because there's a lot of reds in that plan. So if you put your hand up to ask and say, well, it's because of start dates, I know that, but we just need to make sure. Okay, even this is something really, really good, I am going to move things along.
It is really, really good. It answers your question.
I'll judge it in a minute.
So the RAG status on the partnership plan is actually a priority status. So the red means high priority, the amber is medium priority, and the green is lower priority. So it's not that they're outstanding. The red ones are the ones that we are working on as a matter of priority at the moment.
I know that's in the document, and Richard's shown that to me, but a lot of them haven't actually started. And I appreciate it might be dates, but I'd just like someone just to go through that to make sure we're up to speed and things are being done, like the dates. But Mark,
Yes, Chair. So it's just going to check in terms if you're coming to the end and resolutions.
I think so. I think we've had quite a healthy debate on it.
Yeah. We can obviously, the resolution is to essentially ask the Safer Waverley Partnership to note your comments. So we could send them a section of minutes, but I was just wondering if you want to send them a few more specific steers, and I had some suggestions based on the conversation.
Yeah.
Recognise a distinctive cluster of rural crime in Bramley, additional quantification of targets where possible, explicit link to the suicide prevention strategy to be added, and a summary of why the late commencements are late.
Just, you know, don't need War and Peace, just
sorry, and maybe an additional recommendation to Waverley Exec as opposed to the Safer Waverley Partnership Exec about the producing the community-focused KPIs using existing data, potentially for data only.
Yeah, I mean, the KPIs could be information that is held by other partners. So I don't think it's just Waverley. And as I say, I was very keen for the work that Mary did on suicide prevention, that, you know, we need to see if we're doing what we're saying we're doing. Annie, and then I'm going to
I think we probably need to bring something back, and we need to work out what's Waverley's to do and what's the partnerships to do.
because this is Safer Waverley,
This
and
is a statutory function of the partnership, not a function of Waverley. And also we need to think about resources. The list that you've you've talked about is a huge amount of work. And we just need to think about what resource we can have and what we've got and what we can apply and work with the portfolio holder as well as the partnership on priorities within.
Because the suicide prevention strategy is a Waverley strategy, so therefore Waverley,
Yes.
you know, it's owned by them.
Yeah.
But I think because it's been linked in, so yes, that's not a partnership responsibility.
No,
it
it's not
is a
partnership
pure
responsibility.
Waverley. And I'm hopefully that all the questions, the information is there. Often it's just extracting it from it. But as always, we do not want one piece for the next meeting. You know, we want to the points. What have we done? What haven't we done? You know,
Triggers
otherwise,
are a good example. We can give you numbers of triggers, but it may be nothing to do with Waverley Borough Council. It could be to do with the partnership. So putting those into our internal monitoring reports, we just you just need to have to think about what recommendation you wanted to make for the executive one.
yeah, and it might be that we just do things that the partnership do as a team, as a partnership, which is their responsibilities, which come to those priorities that have been listed in the document. We've got to be very, very focused. Okay, I think a really good debate. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody online. I knew you wouldn't stay silent for too long, seeing that there. So, and I was right. So there's one recommendation that we provide the comments, which we have done, and to be considered by the Safer Waverley Partnership. Is everyone agreed that we put those comments in? Agreed. And those who haven't got any more items, if you want to go, we'll let you go, or you can be sad and stay and listen to the rest of the meeting. But thank you for your time tonight. So if we can move on then to item 7, which is the leisure management contract, which is pages 29, I've got it down to 30. And I think, Annie, you are leading on this tonight.
And Mr. Mills tonight.
So you'll be sensible then. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, many of the members around the table today will know that the current leisure contract expires and that it's been subject to much debate in terms of moving it forward, and that we must get a new contract in place for July next year. There's been a huge amount of work, many of you will be aware about, on the project working group to look at how we maximise the opportunity for the council and provide great leisure services for the public, for their health and well-being, etc. An ONS task group influenced that process and has done an awful lot of work for which we're grateful. And you'll be aware that a standard questionnaire had been out in August, looking for expressions of interests. We're pleased to say that we got, from the 11 original expressions of interest, we've now got 3 proper responses that actually meet the criteria. And those are now with the contract monitoring team and the procurement team to review, to see how they score against the priorities that you set with the executive. And then we'll move forward to a proper formal evaluation and the tender. So it's good news.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And I will say, I think the timescales are quite tight. So there's not much time to take a deep in, take a breath, because they're very, very tight.
Yeah, and we're moving at pace, and that they need evaluation. They, as you can imagine, they are fairly hefty documents that need detailed evaluation, because this is a lot of money. It's a big responsibility, and it has a big impact on the community. And it's really intensive work for the teams. But to have 3 decent submissions, which is what I understand, because I haven't actually seen them, it wouldn't be right for us to see them at this stage. Is good news.
That's fine. And of course, it's important. It's not just about price; it's about quality, customer service, and all those other things that we need.
Facilities.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one, but a good contract, when you evaluate it, you normally find that one just jumps straight up because they just give you it all. But good luck with the timescales, and I know this committee will be really pleased for any updates we can get, but without slowing down the process, because you haven't got that.
Yeah, and thank everybody for their input.
Yeah, it was a brilliant
it's a
bit
huge
of work. It really was.
Team Waverley effort
I know the documents were horrendously big,
Yes.
weren't they? Horrendously big, so
Yes.
very good.
And I spoke to Calvin earlier this evening and I said, are you pleased with the response? And he was very pleased. And that's significant in itself. Sometimes you can get counties in and think, actually, I was expecting something a bit different, but he was pleased.
And you know, if you've got 3 really good, then you've got a good choice.
Yeah.
So well done to everybody on that. And well done to the people from this committee who've helped
Yes.
do it. I think it's been invaluable. So questions, I think Vice Chair wants to.
Yeah, just a very quick one. I'm talking to Calvin over the last some months now about the possibility of moving 40 degrees into the farming leisure centre. And I understand from Calvin that doesn't impact on the current evaluation, it's just like an outline evaluation. When would you need any sort of decision on that aspect from ourselves and 40 degrees, how it's going to be folded into a final design?
I'll take that back to Calvin and get him to respond to you and respond to the committee. That's
Just
fine.
put it as an action mark just so we can keep track of it. Thank you.
It is something that we're keen to do, but it's a timing issue, isn't it? I can check that.
Okay, questions from the floor, anyone else other than, no? Other than well done, keep on the good work and look forward to the update. So if nothing else, we'll move on please to item 8, which is the local planning enforcement action plan, which is pages 31 to 62. Pleasure of inviting Beth to take the floor and finish all through.
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, this is the long-awaited, updated local planning enforcement plan. I'm not quite sure why it says on the agenda it's an action plan. The title is local planning enforcement plan. It seeks to update the 2013 plan that was adopted shortly after the first publication of the NPPF. So it is about time that we brought it up to date. The former document referenced a lot of policy that is no longer in place. There are some headlines. I won't go through it forensically, but primarily, say, it seeks to delete references to out-of-date documents and bring it up to date, referencing the current corporate strategy priorities, legislative provisions, for example, the new GPDO, General Development Order, the latest iteration of the NPPF. It then seeks to explain that enforcement action is discretionary, it has to be proportionate, but also in combination with that, we have to manage our own resources in ensuring that effective enforcement action is taken. And that explanation is to manage public expectations, because often the public, you'll find that they think we're the police, that they think we've got all these powers available to us and we don't. So we hope that this section of the plan will help manage those expectations. It provides some accountability as well, where the previous plan doesn't. It, as it says, it refers to the publication of the quarterly performance report, which indeed reports against the performance indicators. And lastly, it includes a section that is really an undertaking to review it more regularly. So at least every 2 years, if not more frequently, if new legislation comes in that substantively changes the contents. I'm happy to answer any questions.
So it probably would be good just to flag it up in a year's time, just to see whether we've had changes in legislation, because if you don't have it flagged up, it's easy to forget it for the 2 years. I have 2 questions, but I believe Councillor Jerry Hyman might be online. You might have a question.
Hello.
Good evening, Jerry. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Good evening, Chairman. If you like, I'll wait until after the members have had a go, because I have got some points which have been raised by David Howell, who you know, I think, or members know well, who's got quite a lot of depth of knowledge on the resident side of how these things pan out in practice. Would you like members to discuss first, and I'll fill in any gaps that are left from that, rather than me go through, because I think I've got 7 or 8 points altogether that I would like to run through. Very easy ones, relatively easy.
If they're easy, just run through them, and then we'll deal with that. So we.
Okay, if we can go first of all to page 7, we add 34 to whatever I say if you want your numbers. Page 7 of the report. It says that in the second paragraph, the exception is where the council considers there's no real prospect of planning permission being granted, and we wondered whether whose consideration is that? Is that the enforcement officer or a junior planning officer? Is it a team leader? And in my view, I think that takes us to the scheme of delegation. So I'm wondering, do we look at the possibility of important and controversial cases being taken to have the ability to take them to committee, and whether members of this committee think it would be a good idea to suggest to the executive that we put something into the constitution to allow that. So there's a whole discussion around that area of who is it that's actually making the decision in the end, because obviously practical implementation depends very much on that point there. So that's the first, I suppose, perhaps the biggest issue in implementation. I do think it's an excellent report as far as brilliantly written. Understand it's not been consulted upon, so I hope we have got the opportunity to be able to add things in if necessary, and for the committee to make any changes or suggest changes that perhaps we'd like to see. In priority 3 on page 8, it's page 42, but priority 3, that includes new accesses. So it's a low priority being given to new accesses, and Mr. Howells thinks that this should perhaps be a higher safety. It's a safety consideration. Perhaps it should be a priority 2 consideration. If members would think about that, please. On page 11 in section 6, regarding the investigation process, there is a common issue here where we are told that there's nothing on the planning enforcement register. So there's a question of whether there should be a pending register as well. So both have dates on them, so everyone knows when the registers were last updated. And apparently in the past, when people have filled in forms to register a breach, they've been told the breach has already been registered, but there wasn't anything on the register. So as a matter of the information process that goes along with this plan, are there ways that we can ensure, other things that we can do better perhaps in order to make sure that the residents who, obviously it's difficult for residents and officers to see things from exactly the same point of view. So people live next door to something, they've got a perhaps vastly different view to that of the officer investigating. I don't want to, I'm not criticising our officers, it's just natural, obviously. Then on page 11 in section 7, regarding progress on enforcement cases, it says we will make efforts to keep the interested parties regularly updated. That's a little bit wishy-washy, perhaps, as far as a plan is concerned. It would certainly be an improvement. I think most people would agree on what we've had in the past, and that would be very welcome. Can it be more specific, perhaps? Could it say every 6 months or a year, or whatever sort of time frame we're talking about, if investigations are long, because they are often it's quite a long process, obviously, by the nature of the beast. So just so that members know what stage it's at. And then also a matter of the person who raises the issue in the first place, the neighbour usually who has raised the issue. Is it possible for us to add something in there whereby we make sure that that person is kept involved, or at least informed of what's going on, because these can go on over a long period of time, and people are just they see the breach and they see nothing's done about it, until perhaps one day something is. but it would be nice for them to know, and rather than be either pleasantly or unpleasantly surprised, just to know how things are going. I know that's adding to the workload, but it's pretty much what we're saying in the document that we will do. And can we have a system perhaps of doing that? Finally, really, there's the issue of implementation. If I jump you back to the foot of page 8, where it tells us that the council will work within the legal framework, having full regard to the legislation, relevant case law and planning appeal decisions. Well, that's a whole issue in itself, obviously, of a matter of ensuring that happens. But there's then a list of 5 bullet points of different elements of law which are going to be included in the thorough investigation. Could officers run through those? Because obviously we as councillors and residents really don't have any idea of how each of those 5 different acts or pieces of legislation affect the decision that's being made and bind us to do things or don't bind us to do things. So really, could we just have an explanation as to how those acts affect the outcome of the decision or the way that we process each of the cases as they come up?
Thank you, Joe. I'm just conscious of the time, and 1, we're trying to scribble notes, and 2,
but as I said, I thought a lot of this may have been covered by other members. But 1 point also, the bottom of page 4, I don't know whether there's a link there to section 17,661A of TCPA 90. And unfortunately, there aren't 20,000 sections to that law, to that act. It's 171. If we can just make a note of that. It's the only thing I've found in there that where a finger's gone awry. It's a very good report. Thanks very much.
Okay, my pleasure. That's right. I've just got a couple of comments, and then I'll leave Beth in to answer the question. So the first point you made about it going to committee, I'm not sure if you're talking about this committee. Well, this is not our role to be doing that. If it's the planning, then there need to be a legal reason why it goes. To me, it should be about enforcement, working with the ward member, and that's the process. We don't have a committee that overviews that, so I certainly wouldn't be recommending that to the committee. The stuff on page 8 with the legislation, I think they can put a hyperlink into that to the relevant bit. That stuff, I think that could be quite good. The new access being priority 2, I wouldn't. I think if it's a new access that has safety issues, then I would agree. But a new access that doesn't have any safety issues, then you wouldn't want to make that a priority. The point about progress on enforcement, absolutely agree. I 100% agree with that. I tend to have to normally phone up to get an update when stuff's been dragging on, and I know I haven't had a response. So I think a little bit of thought can be put into that. Now, I didn't want to answer all your questions, Beth, but do you want to?
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, that's been really helpful. In terms of Councillor Homan's question relating to who decides whether an application has no real prospect of planning permission being granted, the enforcement team are planners. They are qualified to make those decisions. As with planning applications, they make recommendations to be signed off by somebody who has delegated authority to make those decisions. So they are decisions that go through the same level of scrutiny as other delegated decisions within the service. As to whether or not there is a role for the planning committee there, the scheme of delegation delegates all enforcement matters pretty much to the head of service, who has discretion as to whether or not to exercise those powers. So it is not that nothing can go to the planning committees. In fact, I've presented a number of items that have been enforcement cases to the planning committee, but that's a matter that falls to the discretion of the head of service. In terms of the comment relating to accesses being a higher priority, you're absolutely right, Chairman. These are such ases, if that's a term. So we included the word such as to reserve the right to escalate it if we consider that there is a danger being posed by any of these breaches that are listed. So they can move about in accordance with, you know, the degree of harm being caused. In terms of the planning register, this is interesting, and it's interesting because the planning register is very specific. The enforcement register, it relates to formal notices that have been issued. We are required by legislation to keep a register of those. Now, I think Councillor Hyman and quite possibly any other reasonable person reading this may misconstrue this to mean a planning register for complaints already submitted. So perhaps we could clarify what that planning enforcement register is for. People will not know who's made complaints, and if people have made complaints about what they want to complain about. And that's because enforcement is largely confidential until you get to that formal stage where a notice is issued and it goes onto the enforcement register. In terms of progress updates, there's two parts that I noted with that. The wishy-washy comment, I think it's very easy to undertake to update complainants at regular intervals, but oftentimes, because the enforcement process is the way it is, there isn't an update. Now, I agree that communication could be improved and can be improved quite a lot. And to the comment adding to officers' workloads that Councillor Hyman said, I mean, if we're not contacting people proactively, they will be contacting us. So I would say it's a mutual impact, really. So I will certainly take that back to the team about the communication, but I would be reluctant to stipulate specific timeframes, simply because oftentimes it will be a phone call to say there's no update. Now, I understand that a lot of people do appreciate that sort of phone call as well, but it also gets quite frustrating for them after a amount of time. But I'd be interested in others' comments on that. And in terms of the bullet points for the other legislation, I'm happy to run through what they mean here, but I'm not sure that's the question that was being.
No, I just think anyone reading the document should have a hyperlink.
Absolutely.
We're not going for a discussion now.
No, that's fine. And finally, the typo was the first thing that I wrote down before you started speaking, Councillor Hyman. That struck me as well. So apologies for that. It will be corrected.
I think with updates, the only point, yes, it's when you don't hear anything, and there has been an update and you don't get it. I've had a couple recently. I mean, the two comments I would make, and then I'll open it up. I mean, I've worked a lot, as you know, over the years with enforcement, and I think we've got some incredibly good people who work really, really hard. And I suppose my question, and it's a supportive question though, is I look at their workloads and I just wonder how those workloads compare to our neighbouring councils, because I know the one who covers my area is often one job to another. It's just constant. And I suppose it's a question is, have we got the right establishment? Because they seem to be pulled from pillar to post. So it's a supportive question. How do we compare to others? Now, again, I'm not expecting you to come back now, because if actually we haven't got the right establishment, then maybe that's something we should be looking at. And the three levels of enforcement, I just wonder how we will perform against those timescales, because I know cases I've put forward that how they would fit in that, and they're certainly not getting the response in, I don't think, within those timescales. And that's not because they're lazy or anything else, it's because they work incredibly hard. So it's one to say well done to the team. I just think it's quite a small team.
So if I may, just, I don't have the numbers about the neighbouring authorities, and I'm sure you don't expect me to, but in terms of the number of officers within the team, they're a man down at the moment. And well, they've just had a vacancy filled with an inexperienced enforcement officer. We're building them up at the moment. For about 2 weeks, they were at full complement, but we had just stolen one of the enforcement officers into the planning applications team. So there is enough vacancy again, and we do have a number of very, very high profile court-related cases which are diverting a lot of officer attention. Whether we are operating with the right amount of officers, I think we need to do a bit of work around that to understand how we compare to other authorities. I don't have the answer, but I can certainly have a look at that sort of stuff for you.
And it is a supportive question,
Yes,
because
absolutely.
I know the value that the team provides, but we've got to be careful we don't burn them out. And, you know, is their workload twice of, I don't know, Guildford or somebody else, or Woking, and you know, they've got a caseload of 30 each and everyone else has got 10. And, you know, so I just think a very simple bit of work,
Yeah.
you know, it might actually help to ensure you've got some capacity and some resilience, because you know, they always seem to be pulled from pillar to post. And I can only speak, you know, the work I do with John. And I think, you know, he's all over the place trying to sort something out. And you almost feel embarrassed asking him to look at another case because of the workload. So I think that'd be really, really useful. But again, please don't do loads and loads of work. Just a quick call, how many officers you've got and what's their average workload? How does it compare? And if we are totally off kilter, then I can speak to the leader and the executive and say, do we need to look at this? And I know the leader will probably say, well, it's about money. Again, I'm not going to start that conversation.
Yeah.
But our role as scrutiny is just to make sure.
I say that every time.
Yeah,
Chairman.
absolutely. But our role is to just make sure that we scrutinise the work. And if it's being impacted because of a lack of resource or the right resource, but actually incredibly high workload, then we've got to highlight it. Okay, open it up for questions. Richard, I can see your hand, and then Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll echo what was previously said. Really good document, very clear, very easy to follow, written by people who know what they're doing. So I endorse that. So I've just a couple of points which are related to the documentation rather than the actual plan. On page 3 of the new plan, which is page 37 of our papers, statements made, it's our policy to exercise powers appropriately. And I asked the question, where's that policy actually documented? You know, a plan sets out the intent of how a policy will be carried out. I tried to do a quick search of the Waverley website to see if I could find a policy, but it's not really throwing up anything intelligent at the moment. The search engine's not working properly. So there may be a plan. I just asked the question, a policy, does one exist? And if not, should one be written so that the borough has a clear statement of, at a very high level, very short document, just saying what does the borough expect in terms of planning enforcement? Because this is an optional service. So, you know, a policy statement that says we will have this optional service, for instance, and then, you know, something about exercising powers appropriately. It's a thought, but plans should follow on from policy. And I'm not sure that the policy is actually there. So that's a starting point. And the other one, I'm sure I'm going to get a round of applause from my colleague on the left and possibly from the leader as well. It's no document control. Ladies. It has, you know, it has this header which says version 1.1, but actually Annex 2 is a document with pretty much the same title. So surely the new plan's version 2.1, and who approves it, and when's it going to be updated, etc. You know, standard Waverley document control box would be great to see. It will just make it that easier to manage. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, I'm sure the points have been recorded by Mark, who can forward them on. Councillor Darcy.
Thank you. I found it very, very interesting. I learned a lot from reading it that I didn't know about enforcement. What struck me was a couple of things. One was that on the flowchart, which was really interesting and useful, it says breach of planning control, question mark. And obviously there's a lot must go on before you decide whether it's breached. And there doesn't seem to be a huge amount. I mean, there's no consideration of that in this flowchart of what's involved in each process. Each decision point, I suppose, is what they are. And the second thing that I thought about that was that the text seems to go straight. It is very much focused on the notices and what happens if a notice isn't followed. Whereas that actually in the flowchart is right down the bottom. So there's loads of other decisions being taken before you even get to the notice bit being issued. And I didn't think there was an awful lot about that part of the process, which seems to me is quite an important part of it. So before you actually issue a notice, lots of things must have been considered, lots of things are going on, lots of information is gathered. There doesn't seem to be a lot about that, but that's kind of key for me. And then I noticed that on page 10, you have a section which seems to be slightly out of place, where it says failure to comply with formal notices. And that's really before you've even said what these notices are. It just seemed, I thought, that was you kind of jumping the gun. You didn't really talk about why you would issue any particular notice. You just went straight to say, well, if they don't obey the notice, you can do this. And why would you issue the notice in the first place? And you know, and then there's lots of different types of them. But it was entirely clear to me which one you choose when. And you haven't really covered it. I mean, that's just my view. But I don't want to be too critical because I loved reading it and I thought it was really interesting.
Okay, well, if you can, I don't need necessarily to respond, but if you can look at the comments made.
Absolutely.
And then where we can just clarify and try and get it into that order so it's more of a story. Yeah, that's the whole point of it coming to scrutiny.
Absolutely.
It's not to justify why it has or hasn't. So, but you don't feel necessary to answer that and take it away, and then your version control and the next version control will show that these amendments from this committee, hopefully. Anybody else got any points?
I'd like to agree it's an excellent document, and taking up Councillor Seaborn's point, I mean, a lot of what is policy is actually in the proportionate response, and I think just with a little bit of segmentation, there are actually the makings of two documents already in the words here.
Okay, Councillor.
I'd also like to compliment everyone who put a lot of work into this report, but also on page 54, I've highlighted the Waverley Borough Council Corporate Plan 2012-2015 sets out the corporate priorities of the council over the 3-year period, and I've highlighted one of the priorities is to protect and enhance the area's unique mix of rural and urban communities throughout our towns, villages and hamlets. So the primary, and then the next sentence, the primary function of enforcement action is to protect the environment in the public interest. And I think maybe that should have a more prominent place or be in bold. To do this, we must be consistent and act proportionately. So that's my comment to that. And I was very pleased to see that, but I would like it highlighted.
Shows importance, absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Again, if we can just note those are easy tweak. Anybody else got any questions? Okay, Beth, thank you very much for that. I think the general consensus is a really good report. A couple of tweaks here and there. Yeah, you've got everything in there. It just needs maybe a little bit of scheduling of it, version control, and a couple of points like we've just mentioned. And I think it will make this a really good report. So I'm sure we will Mark would have made notes of what we've suggested. So that's very good. And then we'll hopefully see just a slightly revised with not too much work, just to tweak that. That's really good.
Sorry, Jack, can I just clarify, are you recommending that, because I think you had comments from Councillor Seaborn, Councillor Hegan about there being a policy sitting above the action plan, which seems like a larger provision. Is that being recommended?
I think that was the recommendation, just to draw out, but the stuff is actually already in the report.
Yeah.
So hopefully that should be just a matter of splitting what is actually sits in the first one and then what sits in within this report. But again, I think everything's in there. It just sets the scene. And But if you know, any of the comments, if you need clarity, just go to the councillors' raised it, just to make sure we try and capture them all. And maybe Mark, if you just circulate that to everybody, just to make sure we've got an accurate record and we do what we say we think is right, rather than trying to interpret what the comments were. But really good, well done.
Thank you very much for asking Mark to circulate, because there are so many things that we have to look at that it would be really lovely to receive that, Mark. Thank you.
Then we make sure that actually what we say, and a couple of times, bless him, Mark, you might interpret it one way, and actually we've interpreted it a second way. So it can go through. We'll do a week's turnaround for the comments that are, what we've said, and then we'll pass it on as an agreed comments. Brilliant. Anything else from anyone before I move on? Well done, Beth, that was good. Okay, so if we can move on to item 9, please, which is the corporate performance report, pages 63 to 122. Louise, are you going to sort of open it up? I see we've got Richard poised like a coiled spring. So do you want to open it up and then we'll go into the individual areas where we need to?
Thank you, Chair. Only really just to say apologies. You have in front of you hopefully an additional piece of paper, which is to substitute your agenda page 96 or 30 of the actual corporate performance report. It's a updated report from the housing delivery, and that's only your community's remit, not the housing delivery, which is maybe of interest. But nothing further from me, Chairman. Questions, I'm sure my colleagues are poised to answer.
Okay, well, I know Richard's been so excited. So, Richard, do you want to talk through your world, and then we're.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting to be on first, Chair, but.
Oh, it's a see, I don't put on the spot.
Happy to just briefly comment on it. I don't propose reading through it. There's an awful lot there, and hopefully members have had a chance to read it. But quite clearly, we are coming out in Q2. We were coming out of COVID. Things were returning to normality, but we were finding, certainly on the food safety side of things, that there were lots of businesses that standards had slipped and lots of new businesses coming along. So quite a bit of work going on, quite a bit of work around infectious diseases, etc. And some projects through the Food Standards Agency around gas safety and catering premises, just to make sure people have maintained their appliances correctly during COVID, and things weren't going to be a problem going forward. The pollution team, as you can see from the statistics, are as busy as ever in terms of dealing with complaints and consultations, working through there, and we've detailed quite a bit of stuff there. And again, with the planning, the taxi trade took a big hit during COVID. They are coming through it, but they are having difficulty obtaining drivers now, and certainly lots starting to go on with temporary events again. Everybody wants to get out and enjoy themselves again, and during the latter part of Q2, there were quite a lot of events happening and going on, keeping our licensing team busy. Emergency planning has had some testing times with water outages and other issues to respond to. And thankfully, we can confirm that we did respond to them robustly and provide a good support for communities. And lastly, environmental services have continued to work with BIFA to maintain services and get back to a full service following shortages of drivers and shortages of staff through COVID, and address some of the issues around miscollections caused by unfamiliar crews and drivers working in some of the rural areas. So things moving forward, certainly improving. Parking services, again, there are strong signs of recovery in car park usage, which is encouraging when people are getting back into the high streets and starting to visit businesses again. And lastly, an awful lot of work going on with the sustainability team. around the carbon neutrality action plan and the projects they're working on to deliver significant carbon reduction going forward. Obviously, a number of these areas are not my responsibility from now on, but you will hear from my successors in those areas in the next quarterly report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I'll just very quickly just talk about emergency planning before we get onto it. I mean, I was aware of the flooding in Hazelmere, which ultimately was I think a Thames Water issue, but it was really pleasing to see how County Council, because I control emergency planning for the county, Waverley Borough Council, and other agencies, there was no debate on whose responsibility it was. It was work as a team to try and resolve it and then worry about that later. And I do think that's a real positive. And I know it was mentioned to me, it was really encouraging to see Waverley, Surrey, Thames Water, Environment Agency, Surrey Fire and Rescue, everybody working together as a team. So that was really, really good. Unfortunately, these meetings can sometimes be the doom and gloom because you're looking for areas where performance isn't good. But actually, that's a really, really good example of partnership working. So, please pass it on to the team. It was really good to see that happening. I'll open it up and I've probably got a couple of things, but I'm glad to see some more greens appearing. I think there's still quite a few reds in areas that you think, we've got to do better here. But as long as there's more greens each time than there are reds, it's always good. So open it up for people. I can see the first hand, second hand. So, Vice Chair, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. It's a bit disappointing to see that the KPI, what P1, which you've got something like, I don't know, a bit less than 20% of the cases taking more than 26 weeks. Is there a specific reason why that's a continuing problem? Why have we got such a large number of cases? All red.
Yeah, it's one of these things. Unfortunately, this is where it'd be probably better if our document just did the bits of the area that we cover, because you're absolutely right. But it doesn't sit within our remit. Is there a way?
It does sit. I do beg your pardon. It does sit within our remit. It's just that I thought we were going to address questions to Richard. I'm sorry.
But some of the report is for other areas, and it does make it quite confusing. So, can we ask questions in relation to Richard, and maybe we'll come to that. Okay, comes that one. Okay. Anything else you want to raise? Councillor Seaborn and then Councillor Reid.
Thanks. Right, so on page 41 of the report, page 107 of our papers, it's reported that 60% of 124 food hygiene inspections carried out resulted in written warnings being issued. That feels like an awfully large number. So I guess the question is, have we got a problem here? How does that compare with previous years?
Well, I did mention in my introduction to it that when we started going back into businesses after COVID, the COVID clampdown, obviously standards had slipped. And businesses were struggling to maintain their services, maintain their businesses, and inevitably hygiene is one of the factors that does slip. And I think that's indicative of the impact COVID had on businesses. And businesses are still struggling to get staff following the COVID period, and staff shortages inevitably lead to lower standards. They were warning letters as opposed to improvement notices or prohibition notices, so they weren't for serious matters, but it does indicate a lowering of standards generally in terms of cleanliness and hygiene generally.
So is that something that's going to worry us if it doesn't pick up?
No, I mean, the fact that we're going out and doing this and giving those warning letters, when we go back and do the revisits, we'd expect an improvement. And we need to see whether that improvement is maintained going forward. And that's the whole point of the process, the inspection procedures, is the worse standards you find, the more frequent your visits are until standards improve. So those premises that have had warning letters will get another visit quite soon to make sure they've complied with the requirements.
Great, okay, thanks. So on the theme that we started earlier about collecting data and then using it, on page 42 of the report, which is page 108 of ours, there's a table of complaint types for the environmental protection team, and that's helpful. But it's what it is actually a useful indicator of the team's workload, rather than it doesn't tell us much about how effective the team's been. I wonder it would certainly help me if their performance was being measured by knowing how many cases in each category of complaint that actually resulted in action, the number of cases that were dismissed, and the number of cases that are still under investigation. I would hope that all that data is being collected for ongoing performance management, so it shouldn't generate much more work. But if you look at the seemingly high number of noise complaints, for instance, how many actually resulted in action being taken? Because it's my experience that it's really difficult to gather adequate evidence for to demonstrate true noise nuisance. If only a few cases generate action, then that's an indicator that the team's actually got a challenge, which we could analyse, whereas just looking at the total number of cases, it looks high, but it doesn't tell us anything other than the workload. So if it doesn't generate too much extra work, I think it'd be more helpful for us not to just see the number of cases, but to actually see what the outcomes or the status of those cases is. It's not, I think it's asking for more KPIs. I'm hoping this data is all available. It would just help us to make a judgment about how the teams are actually performing. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense, and it is something we're currently looking at in terms of more performance management data coming forward. So hopefully in your next quarterly report, you'll see some improved performance management data coming through.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. And in the spirit of what the chair said earlier as well, that might give us the opportunity to be constructively supported where needs are identified. Whereas just from the workload, it's not clear whether support's needed or whether whether there's a problem. Thank you.
Okay, other questions? That's Louise.
If you turn to page 47 on page 113, E4A, E4B, missed bins figures for quarter 2. There's an issue, is there not, Richard? And I must say, thank you very much for you and your team for everything you've done for Cranley. I'm getting the fly tipping under control, clearing an awful lot of it. So thank you for that. But I'm just thinking here, there's a software issue. I mean, that is very important because otherwise we're using so much more manpower, aren't we, to double the people that go out and collect missed bins, which have been wrongly reported because the bin lorry is a bit late, So I think that issue needs looking at because it's going to cost the council an awful lot of money at the end of the day. So I wondered if there might be a better way of working with that, or for you to tell us if that is ongoing. And are you waiting for software? Is software being written? 2 of my children actually write and deal with software all the time, so I know how important it is.
You're right.
Otherwise, sorry.
So this is the software used by Biffa, and it's Biffa's software that was modified slightly, which has caused a glitch in the system. They're working on a fix for it, but the crews on the ground do know whether the bins that have been reported as missed have been missed in reality. So they're not going back unnecessarily for bins that have already been collected, but the data we're getting from the system is telling us there's more missed bins than there actually are. So it will be fixed, and it's a Biffa software issue that we have to wait for them to fix, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Richard? Okay, Richard, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Escaped unharmed. Okay, so who have we got to speak next? Is Jenny next? I think Jenny's the planning one we can do next.
Beth is here. If she,
Yeah,
if
do you want to
move on
take the planning?
Yeah.
Me too, Chairman.
The sea of red, almost. Well, it's not quite so bad, but there's quite a lot of red. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. I think probably ought to make it clear, I'm standing in for Sally Busby, the business performance manager. So if I can't answer the question, I will take it away.
Yeah.
And I can't answer the questions on policy. I'm development management officer. So I will take those questions away. You'll see pretty much the first 5 indicators show a dip in performance when compared with the previous quarter. As the narrative explains, these are applications from the backlog where the decision has been made previously to not seek time extensions. These are applications that are now coming through the system. So we were expecting this, but similarly, not similarly, but also we are expecting it to return to a much higher rate next quarter. And indeed, I've seen some of the performance statistics for this quarter that we're in, and they are back to showing the upward trend. So yes, there's no fluffing this up really. They dipped, but the important thing is that we are very much back on the up now, and I'm very confident that you'll see those results in the next quarter's report. I just wanted to highlight, I think Sally's probably previously mentioned it in this meeting, that we're going to be introducing 2 new indicators that seek to measure performance against our new pre-application offer. We relaunched and rebranded the pre-application service in August, so we haven't actually got a full quarter's returns yet on performance. P6 will therefore be deleted. You will have 2 new indicators in its place. So looking forward to sharing those with you next quarter. Happy to answer any questions.
Two questions.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, the two jumped out for me were the P4, which was the enforcement. We did quite, from 82% down to 57%. To me, that was the big concern, and obviously the plan applications we failed 5 quarters on the trot and gone down 10% in the last quarter on P1. Mark, so we don't forget, because I will, when we next meet, can we just remember to just double check those 2 to make sure they're going in the right direction, because otherwise we'll have a whole report. And those 2, I suppose, jump out at me, but I'll open it up to members to ask questions. Councillor Darcy?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the service levels of bronze, silver, gold and platinum for the pre-application service. I just found it slightly odd that the bronze had a shorter time than the silver. I suppose that's because they're getting less.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Exactly it.
Okay. But it would be nice to know what the difference between these 4 things was.
Happy to answer that.
If you've got the answer, yeah.
So the bronze pre-applications, they are setting out to the applicant what the relevant policies are to their scheme, what we would expect a submission to include, and what they would need to satisfy us of. That is, as you'd expect, no assessment, so it's a quick turnaround. Silver tends to be for resubmissions of refused applications, where they're looking for ways to overcome reasons for refusal, certainly on the household side of things, but also you tend to get more of the commercial proposals in there, and they get more of a, are we likely to support it kind of answer. The golds, they tend to be much more involved with big schemes, they cost more, and you are often going through various iterations of the scheme to get into a position where we think we can support it. So the higher you go up in the ranking, more of a response you're going to get, the more interaction there's going to be. And as you know, platinum is most of the time going to be linked with a PPA as well, so a planning performance agreement, where we will be with them every step of the way.
So the more you pay, the more you get.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, anybody else? Okay. I mean, I have, you know, Mark has asked Mark for those 2 ones in particular, which they did. I think if they did to the next quarter, I think Sally will probably need to give a bit of an update on what the plan is.
So that P1 and P4.
So at the moment, there's the 2 that jump out to me, if anybody else has got any others, but the fact that we failed 5 on the trot on P1, and a dip 10% from last quarter, and P4 we've gone from 82% to 57. That is a bit of a dip, you know, and quite a way off. Now there could be 101 different reasons, but I think if the next quarter is a big dip as well, I think we need to know what you're going to do.
Absolutely.
Rather than say, well, can you now go and do an action plan? Because otherwise, it's in 6 months and we're going in a completely wrong direction. Okay.
Can we add P7 to that? A review, that the words as well.
Yeah, that's the number of dwellings commenced. We've got very little ability to influence that. Is that the building actually commencing the building? Does that mean by the builders?
Yes. Yeah. Essentially, that is exactly what it is. Falls outside of development management, so I can't offer you too much comment about that. That would need to be one for Abby as the head of service.
I mean, I'm sure there's, you know, I suppose what the question could be is what do we do to encourage to make sure they actually commence? But there's very little sanctions we've got, and you know. But if we had that, what have we actually been doing? So, how do we chase them up? Do it regularly, you know, a couple of times.
Is there a specific reason why the developers haven't progressed?
I'd guess it's probably because the cost of building's gone up, so therefore they're sitting on it. And then they put one application in saying this is it, and then as soon as they get it with that next application for their second field. But if maybe we can just have a summary on what we are doing.
I was going to say, I think 103 commenced as against 37 6 months ago. It's actually positive, even though it all sits as red.
I suppose 147 is just a quarter of what our allocation is for the year. But I suppose to know, are we doing anything to try and increase that? And I'm sure we are, and I know we are, but it's just about maybe giving a bit of reassurance.
Chair, do you remember some time ago when Graham Parrott was here? I think he came.
Graham who? Oh yeah.
Short memory.
Yeah, I'm only joking.
And I mean, he expressed his immense frustration really, because it's the local authorities that get it in the neck for the figures, and it's nothing that we can do about it. I mean, we've asked the government on various occasions to put sanctions in, but they seem reluctant to do it. But maybe under the levelling up agenda, something will be looked at again with the minister. But it is very frustrating. But we can bring something back as to what.
I mean, I went as a recent appeal where they said, we're not like other builders, we will get straight onto this. Nothing has happened, and another application has gone in. And that was their exact words to the inspector. We aren't like other builders. If we get permission, we'll go straight on and help towards a 5-year supply. And they've sat on it and put another application to make it even bigger. So, you know, yes, exactly. Councillor Darcy and Councillor Forrest, I think it was.
Yeah, a couple of things. Just one was just an observation. It seems I can't understand. There seems to be no relation whatsoever between P7 and P8. So it's like the number completed. There's no relation to the number commenced. You think there would be some sort of pattern, but there doesn't seem to be. Secondly, and this is just out of curiosity, where it says backlog, there's nothing there, there's no data. I realise that obviously you could do the calculation yourself, but I'm not sure why you haven't done it, because it's just
It was something that Zach was going to come back with to explain. It's such a, he wasn't convinced that the figures that we were getting were accurate enough to put in front of you. So we're going to do a review of the way those figures are, because sometimes it's not just when we get commencements, our building control team often get to know about it, but not always. So we have to rely on private sort of, what are they called? The approved inspectors, yes, to let us know. And we don't always know, so there's the time lag. So he was concerned that the figures that started being put into this report weren't as accurate as they could be. So he wanted to do a little review of that. So we need to bring that back. It's not, we haven't forgotten about it. We just need to bring it back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just very quickly, I just want to share Louise's and your frustration on the matter of that applications coming forward and them not being built out. And I think there's an opportunity there for members to really question officers at the planning application stage, to put pressure on the developers to make a commitment. So it's a public awareness thing, even though we know our hands are tied, but at least we can say, well, at committee, you said you would, because it just leaves you with a whole lot of backlog of other stuff that needs to be done. So I absolutely share your frustration. I think the way we deal with it is to actually almost name and shame at committee by asking them to commit and make some proposals that are definitely we've got in writing or on webcam.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I think we've covered that. Thank you everybody for your input and going through that document. You might even finish. Oh my goodness, I'm just about to move on. Oh.
Mrs. In the section that falls to this committee is the communities, and I did circulate a question on the Ukraine service, the numbers that sit behind page 97 on our report, where there's talk of the effectively a backlog of getting out to do the inspections of the premises where the Ukrainian guests are, but also the question that we're coming towards the end of the 6 months, and just some feel of what sort of problem we might have in the housing area if some of the original sponsors are no longer willing to keep their guests. So that's in effectively the top paragraph on page 97. And I know we've not got anyone from.
That would be Andrew Smith, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, but I just think there's a question there and a potential problem looming that we should perhaps be aware of and understand what the situation is a little more than that one paragraph.
I'll come to that in 2 seconds. I thought the government had extended the money scheme, but if I'm wrong.
The head of service for it is Sam, and I'll get her to circulate. In fact, when I was speaking to her earlier before the meeting, she'd got some figures, so I thought she circulated them, she obviously hadn't. I'll check that and come back to you then.
Just might be that soon.
So we want the number and the backlog.
Yeah, I mean, I sent an email.
Oh, it's an email, okay,
to Mark
super.
this morning, but I think I got I wasn't there to see there was an out of office came through.
Yeah, she did get an answer this evening. I thought she circulated it, but I'll chase that.
It's not hit my inbox yet, but
No.
I do think there's a potential problem.
We circulate that.
Yeah, on the community section again, just for clarity, page 31 of the report mentions 2/3 of household support fund being allocated to residents of pensionable age. Just question what's being taken as pensionable age, because the support. The section says that greater focus will be given to supporting residents aged over 64. State retirement age is now 66, but actually you can take a work-related pension at 55. So can we just a couple of words in there, which is just aligning everything, so that when residents ask us, perhaps that could be circulated to members of the committee, just so that we know exactly what is intended.
I mean, I did ask to get involved in the discussions when these criteria were resolved, and it has to be vague because it depends how old you are. So we're supporting pensioners of 65 if they receive their state pension at 65, and some women have had it since they're 60. So you can't, it's in receipt of state pension, which might be at a different age, but.
Right, okay, so the word state pension.
Yes,
That's
that
why
should
we
be what's
receive the
in
state pension.
Yeah.
It covers in all ages.
Yes, yeah. It's just clarity so that we understand if we have to engage with people. Can I just raise a quick point about the leisure centre statistics as well? Page 37 of the report, page 3 of that papers. Statements made that the usage of leisure centres continues to improve, which is a correct statement. But the fact is that the last 2 quarters have essentially been the same. And the quarterly attendances have so far only reached 3/4 of the average in the probably 4 or 5 years prior to COVID. So the question really for officers to think about is, are we confident that we're tracking back towards where we were before COVID, or do we have a new normal here, which will obviously impact on revenues for the new contract? Yeah, it's just observation. I just wanted to know where we were, and we are 25% down on where we were before COVID. The last 2 quarters being essentially the same. It's not indicating that we're going to get back to where we were anytime soon. So do we expect to get there? And if not, are we worrying about it?
I'm sure we can provide that information, and maybe because there's 2 or 3 things that we've asked. Personally, I'd like it probably in one email from Mark, so Mark collates it all.
Yeah.
Here's all the stuff that we need to clarify the understanding. Here's the stuff on it. Otherwise, we'll get loads and loads of different emails from different people. So, Mark, if you can coordinate the various responses and put it into one document, that would be good. Yeah, I'm sure only we can get that information.
I know anecdotally in other circles that where I've listened to discussions about leisure contracts, people have talked about gym membership that wasn't used being cancelled, whereas gym usage is better or the same. But there are a lot of dormant contracts where people were paying and not using. But we'd need to check with Calvin whether that's the case. That would sort of make sense, wouldn't it? You know, that people suddenly thought about gym memberships that they weren't using. But I'll check that out.
Okay, any questions?
I just want to ask, why is Jenny there? She hasn't spoken.
She's keeping a watching brief, I would suggest.
I don't know her title, so
I'm so sorry. She's sorry.
Hello, Jenny.
Jenny, say hello. She's our performance and policy and performance officer.
Thank you.
We used to see Nora and now it's Jenny.
So Jenny will be taking it all in and listening to our views and making any tweaks where.
I just thought she was being left out.
One happy team here. Any other questions on that? No? Okay, so thank you for that. Mark.
Sorry, just to check, there would be this corporate performance report in contrast to most of them. There was also there was not only the recommendation to note, there was the recommendation to endorse the changes to the development management's KPIs. Does the committee want to wish to endorse those?
So it's on page 63 under the recommendations on the covering report. You've got the normal one, which is the sort of the performance report, but then you've got a second bullet point saying endorsing the proposal put forward with regards to the changes to the corporate performance indicators under development management, the deletion of P123A, P153A, and P151A, which is all about the extension of time ones, which are no longer relevant.
No longer relevant because they're not required.
The report explains that the reason why. So the number of applications subject to the extension of time have diminished. Therefore, this committee wanted some time ago to have a look at how many there were, and now he's sort of doing it to the point where it's not really relevant to report on them anymore. So, page 63, 64, it explains it at paragraph 5.2 on page 64.
Views from the committee on that paragraph 5.2.
Well, it says they're no longer requesting extensions of time, so therefore they will just disappear eventually. So there's not much point.
Would anybody contrary to that view? Okay, we will support that recommendation then. That's an easy way of doing it. Okay. We're getting near to the end. So we've now just got the committee forward work programme, pages 123 to 130. So we've had we've got about 5 minutes. I don't know how much time you're expecting to use on this, Mark.
I can probably get through this, depending on how much people have to say in 5 minutes. So in part one, I think the thing to note is that all your recommendations on the climate change action plan were accepted. So yay. In part three, as you'll be able to see, the focus of the January meeting at the moment is likely to be the service plans. I think in contrast to resources, where we will, when service plans and budgets are going through, we'll protect that meeting exclusively for those items. There is capacity to take other items in January if there's suggestions. Noted the chair's request for a update on the Waverley Suicide Prevention Plan, on which the county have asked if they can bring, when their draft suicide, refresh of their suicide prevention plan is available for consultation. They've asked if they can bring it to this committee, which I would suggest you endorse. I would also recommend that you perhaps maybe use that as an opportunity to also hear from partners on that, potentially organisations like Mind, open for other suggestions. The agenda is what otherwise there's not much on the plan beyond this meeting, and if you have any ideas about future topics and future topics for, particularly for task and finish groups that could be considered in the new municipal year, yeah, please do let me know.
Okay, well, I think it would be good on the next meeting to do a bit more of an in-depth analysis on the prevention plan. So I think that does make sense, and it gives us time to do it properly rather than trying to counter through a load of stuff and not do it fully. So absolutely fine.
Excuse me.
Can do. I was just going to finish what I'm saying. But,
Sorry. Off to you.
So I'll
to you.
come to you next. I suppose my one comment, having gone through this, there are a number which is almost same thing. Is it possible that we can look at previous recommendations that we have given, where they are pending, so we've given them to the executive, and they might be pending because of, say, data or something like that, that we know what's happened to them? Because as meeting goes, I can't remember what we did 6 months ago when we said we'd like this, and he came back, well, actually, we haven't got this information, we're looking at doing this. The completed ones are absolutely fine, but any that haven't been progressed. For example, we've got 54.3, which is just an example, page 128, which was to do with BIFA. And it says in progress, inquiry made. Well, that's 24th of June. Where are we now? So it's just doing a review. I don't want to particularly go into that one, but can you, in your role, go through recommendations, say, for the last year, where we've asked for something, just to make sure things aren't then just being, I'm not saying intentionally, but unintentionally not progressed, and actually, so what's the point if we raised it, it's not actually progressed? So maybe on the next meeting, so it gives you plenty of time, that we just, are the pendings that are in progress? Or have we done something? And if we haven't, I can then say, well, not being honest, because Steve sat in here, but why haven't we done anything? We recommended it 6 months ago, you said some progress, nothing's happened. So hopefully there won't be too much work, Mark, but that's, I think, I was scrutiny to make sure we capture everything. So we can just have that as an agenda item next time. And I think that with the suicide prevention strategy, with the other bits, will probably take us up to 2 hours. Anybody got any comments on that document?
On the same thing, really, biodiversity policy and action plan, it's all rejected. The implication is we need to do, somebody needs to do some work on the reason, the main reason is that we need a policy before the rest of the actions can be, the rest of the task can be undertaken. Without the policy, they can't actually progress what we've listed here. So where are we with that?
Okay, because we've got about 30 seconds. Tim, I'll give you 30 seconds. We don't need to go through but just so you get the gist of what we're asking.
Yeah, very briefly, do get the gist. Rejected sounds a bit harsh. Effectively, what the response is in relation to those points, because they are reasonable points, is that they require first and foremost the baselining exercise before they can actually be put in. So, you know, they are not sort of rejected for all, but clearly the first thing that needs to be done in relation to the action plan is a baselining exercise before those kind of adjustments can be made.
And probably that is the wrong word, say rejected. So maybe we go through this plan and go through all of those ones and maybe clarify, update, etc. So, and I haven't forgotten because you've got the most important comment of the night coming.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to reiterate that Mark's rather put it upon himself because he's here as leader member officer, and on page 129, it was exactly what you were saying. So I don't know whether I just wanted to reiterate. Review of outstanding recommendations, to revisit these recommendations, rejected because they were made too early or similar grounds, whatever that means.
And that's why I think we need the update,
Yes.
because some of those, I think it's poor wording saying rejected.
Yes.
And I think more of a commentary might have helped. But it's important that we go back to what we recommended to make sure in 12 months' time there is progress, and if not, why not? So we'll do that.
Thank you,
Vice,
Mark.
I'm sure you've got a couple of.
Well, only one follow-up what we've just been talking about in the biodiversity. And when you're talking about the baseline, who's doing that? Where is that going to come from? It's a database, basically, isn't it? So you can measure where you want to go from that point, or plan from where you want to go. So who's going to be providing that baseline?
The lead officer is Matt Lank, who'll be undertaking it as from the point of view of the Green Spaces team.
Okay, so that's in progress, basically.
So that's in progress. Yeah.
And the only thing I'll mention before I close is I hate the word in progress. It was, you know, because if you say in progress, what does that mean? Does it mean we've got a date of this, we expect in this report, we're going to expect to get this data by? In progress covers everything. And in previous life, it was the actual get out of jail card. It's in progress. So if, for example, Matt would have done a lot of work, actually rather say in progress, right, he's done this, 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 and this. These are the things that we're still waiting for, and these are the dates with, you know, I think in progress just it's a bit wishy-washy. It's a typical action plan word. I think we just need to know, okay, so we expect it back in 3 months' time, or, you know, is this hasn't been started. So I'm sure that can be fed back to actually a little bit more meat on that. Councillor Folaszewski, and then I'm going to call her.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say with regards to item 8 on 120 patients and 21, I'm delighted to hear what Mark had to say there. That's real good news. I think it is part of our corporate strategy, so I think there's some joint thinking going on there. So I'm absolutely delighted to hear what Mark had to say there, because I think it's real good news. So thank you. Look forward to what they've got to say and contribute.
Okay, so I see that's the end of the meeting. I felt by 4 minutes, but I think we have really got into some of these subjects pretty good, which is not wrong. You know, if it's a good, valid conversation or scrutinised, I don't have a problem. So thank you everybody for your attendance. Thank you for your time going through these papers, because they are quite substantial. So have a safe journey back, and thank you for those who have helped support this. Kim and Mark, they are great help to me to keep me on track.